Saturday Live with Carol Dooley on Dublin's new place to relax.
Sunshine 106.8.
This is Saturday Live. I'm Carol Dooley. Delighted to welcome back into the studio. He was with us a few weeks back. Dr. Patrick Treacy, eminent surgeon, aesthetic surgeon, celebrity doctor, and, a man of immense knowledge. And we were chatting after the last time you were in, Patrick, about new evidence suggesting that sunscreen actually is doing us more harm than good. And I said to you, you need to come back on and talk about this. So here you are. That's the deal. So it's said anyway. What's going on?
Okay, so we know that the Western world has had very restrictive guidance against sun exposure over the last 4 decades. And at the moment, that is still the advice from most doctors. But all evidence is pointing towards the fact that this is probably ill-advised. Now, there are many ways of looking at this. For many years, I've been advocating that maybe we shouldn't be blocking out the sun in the way that we are. We know that the sun, or people who are exposed to the sun, are certainly at lower risk of cardiovascular disease, non-cancer cardiovascular disease, associated diseases like diabetes, multiple sclerosis, all the sort of pulmonary diseases, and that the sun benefits all these people. And everybody has all the time been saying, okay, it's the diet, it's what we're eating, it's the Mediterranean diet, but they're not taking into account one major factor, and that is the fact that where we are in terms of latitude is the sun, producing most probably vitamin D, but probably other things. A lot of research coming out of Edinburgh that shows there's probably nitrous oxide that drops blood pressure and so on. I'm going to give you some startling facts now. And the thing is that we've known for a long time that people who wear sunscreen don't have a lower incidence of malignant melanoma, they've actually a higher incidence. We know also that people who wear sunscreen, not only do they live shorter lives by usually about 2.5 years, skin cancers, being a peak within this, have a much better prognostic value in the people who actually are exposed to the sun. Now, we noted originally that there was a peak starting in skin cancers, particularly malignant melanoma, back in the 1950s. And many studies were done at the time that were shown to try and prove this is associated with travel in the sun. But this happened in much later years. Now, I'm not saying everybody not to wear sunscreen. There's many reasons why you should. A child of 1 to 5 should wear sunscreen because malignant melanoma is certainly associated with sun exposure in that age group. But because of the fact that malignant melanoma rates are not dropping, they're still going up, and I speak from certainly a position of authority here from the point of view that one of the sentinel papers that was done in malignant melanomas in the Mayo Clinic between the years of 1950 and 1985 was written by myself as a student there, along with Professor Leonard Kurland, who was chief of dermatology at the time. And this is still one of the papers that is cited. And we were shown an increase in malignant melanomas long predating travel. Now, why does it happen? Most probably because people who are wearing sunscreen are staying in the sun far too long. It's a bit like bottled water many years ago when I was on Sunshine saying, people drinking, 4 to 8 litres of water a day was total nonsense. There was no scientific evidence to support this. When you're thirsty, you need to drink water. When you're not, and most of the thing about toxins, are things made up by bottled water companies. Yeah. Sunscreen is a bit like that as well, from the point of view that if you're in the sun, God has given us the ability through our receptors that you burn and you get back out of it. Now, if there is increased levels, it's probably due to one of 3 things. The first thing is that if you're staying in the sun too long, that's a possibility. The second thing is the possibility, of course, that people who get malignant melanomas are in the sun and people who wear sunscreen are in the sun as well, so there's a causative factor there. And the third thing is maybe sunscreen is a cause itself. And as scientists, we must look at it from this point of view. Now, there's a recent study that's come out of the Carolina Institute by Pell Lindquist, a very well-respected author, and his evidence is in the Journal of Internal Medicine just last March. And they looked at 30,000 people, and they found that, and this is actually quite shocking, that the people who have sun live 2.5 years longer than people who wear sunscreen. We've known this for quite a while in Australia, but it's always been put down to things like, oh, we've better hospitals, or it's exercise and the sort of, have an outdoor life. And I'm not saying it's vitamin D. And we've got to be careful in this country. We've no Surgeon General. We have no vitamin D in our food. It is absolute madness in a country like us that sort of, has no ultraviolet light or no sun coming at all, that suddenly we have SPF 50s in our pharmaceuticals. Our children are being born in Dublin hospitals short of vitamin D. 48% of the Irish population is deficient in vitamin D, and the only place we can get this is through the sun and some green vegetables as well.
You just said something there about the ultraviolet rays, because we're always been told that regardless, even if the sun is not shining, there are ultraviolet rays coming through, and this is one of the reasons why we should wear sunscreen, particularly for women, because it's anti-aging.
If I look at that, there's no doubt about it. I'll leave anti-aging alone just for a moment, because there's no point in dying early with no wrinkles. You'd be better living for another few years with wrinkles. And even though I'm an aesthetic physician, I'll leave the wrinkles to one side. There's no doubt about it that a relationship exists between UV radiation and melanoma of the skin. We certainly know that. And there's no doubt about it as well that UV radiation, as a form of electromagnetic radiation, is capable of damaging cells. We know that as well. But the depletion of the ozone layer over the last few decades has been a concern regarding skin and eye melanomas, but there's no evidence that the increase in UV radiation due to the ozone layer has anything got to do with this, because this all started back as early as 1955. But of more worrying concern is this, that this recent study that was looking at 30,000 Swedish women over the age of 20 years, and these people were recruited from 1990 to 1992, between the ages then of 25 and 64 years old. And what they were trying to look at was detailed thing regarding sun exposure habits. This is the most important thing. When they did that, they found out that non-smokers who stayed out of the sun had a life expectancy similar to smokers who soaked up the rays. Now, this is a really important statement. They found that non-smokers who wore sunscreen and stayed out of the sun had a life expectancy similar to smokers. So this would tend to indicate, believe it or not, that blocking the sun has the same risk factor in terms of mortality as people who smoke. And that evidence is all out there, though. And nobody is even, outside this radio station, you're not seeing it in sort of the papers, you're not seeing it in some of the conventional mainstream. Not for a moment am I saying that anybody who is being diagnosed with non-melanoma skin cancers, they have to wear sun. I deal with these skin cancers myself every day. I take off at least 10 skin cancers a week, and I'm watching the rates go up. But common sense would dictate that if we've been preaching this sunscreen, now for the last 40 years, why is it still going up and going up? And common sense would dictate as well, if evidence is showing that people who wear sunscreen are not living as long as people who sort of are exposed to the sun, why in God's name are we even putting all this into our cosmeceutical products?
But could it be anything to do with, say, the ingredients in the sunscreen? Because there's a lot of parabens in sunscreen.
Well,
if you don't go down the natural
there's
route.
27 different products associated with it, and the possibility obviously exists. Now, we're on sort of fine line here. We don't want the sunscreen companies phoning in, but that have a vested interest. But these things, on all evidence, are showing they're not beneficial to our health. And certainly, they may even be detrimental to the health of our population. And this nonsense that has crept into our society. The only place you can get in your sun and vitamin D is on our faces and on the back of our hands. We're all wrapped up everywhere else. And certainly for most of the period of the year in Ireland, we get no sun at all. And suddenly we're blocking out the only bit we get. The whole thing is a nonsense.
If you just joined us, we're chatting this afternoon here on Saturday Live with eminent aesthetic surgeon Dr. Patrick Treacy on the perils of sunscreen. Lots more to talk about, Patrick. Do stay with me. One area I just want to delve into next is the whole area of ageing, because we've been told, and this is, I guess, more particular for women than men, that unless you put on your sunscreen every day, well, those wrinkles are just going to come get you. So stay with me. More on that next on Sunshine 106.8.
Saturday Live with Carol Dooley on Dublin's new place to relax.
Sunshine 106.8.
This is Saturday Live. I'm Carol Dooley. Legend